And we're live. What's going on, you guys?
How's it going? Happy holidays.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about old school versus new school martial arts and some of the benefits, disadvantages, and implications of each of them. You want to get us started?
Wow, so we're talking modern versus like traditional.
Yeah.
And
maybe some of even the in-between and how they can both apply to each other and some of the challenges that might arise from just focusing on one or the other and starting to have those teams on both sides versus joining them together.
Yeah, so this would be something we'd like for the audience to participate in some of the comments, I think.
Absolutely. I think we'd have a good debate and good conversation about this.
Yeah, because this is very subjective, too. I could tell from my experience of training as a young boy, I mean, it was traditional. You had the Korean masters that came, the rush from Korea after the Bruce Lee. We talked about that as well, and the Chinese martial arts and the wushu. And traditionally, I like a lot of it because it is tradition, and it's developed to a point where wherever it came from, 300 years, 500 years ago. To me, there's just such a connection knowing that when I wear a dobak or a gi or a uniform, that feeling to know that, you know, the martial artists, my teachers, all kind of kept this alive. And there had to be benefits, right? Like even form. There's something that builds in form. And then, you know, you started moving into the MMA and more of the modern, and I see so many benefits to that has to be there now because of the way everything is evolving.
Absolutely.
So
I think one of the good things about moving away from certain traditional aspects is the fact that you end up placing so much on the name of the style and so much on its history that sometimes people aren't paying as much attention to the instructor. Where if it's based off of mixed martial arts, you're not like, oh, I want to learn, you know, from this studio as opposed to this studio because of the style. You're learning it based off of who's there. So if you get too far into like, oh, I just want karate, well, what if there's a couple different studios and you're only going to karate because of its name, but the instructor that's teaching there isn't as good as the instructor that might be teaching something else? When you fall too far into the path of I want this and I want a lineage that goes back this far, what if one person in that lineage as it came back to us watered down the style? One person can destroy the whole thing. And we see that in a lot of styles that are happening with, you know, like I think Wingchun is an incredible art, but I think that there's a lot of times where you have people who are teaching it wrong. And then if you're like, I only want this style because of its name, then you might get stuck teaching it from someone who's really only there because they want the power, not for their true passion of martial arts. And that's one of the things that I like about finding a coach who's coaching based off of their love for the athleticism and for the martial arts itself, as opposed to just what the lineage is.
yeah, well, I think a challenge too is what happened. All the old timers, like Master Liao always said, that the Taoists, the monks, there's nobody left.
Right.
And I think a lot of the masters of each art that was from the tradition, they didn't pass it on right. You know, it became a business, especially in America. And they did kind of only gave half of it. I know even Master Choi talked about how the little percent that he even gave to us,
right,
compared to what he learned. So yeah, it almost was kind of a sad thing that even my master, it's like he didn't. They're not around. We're the only ones teaching the Choi Taekwondo now.
Right.
And so it kind of just died in a way.
And it keeps getting cut in half and half until eventually it has nothing to do with what the original art was.
Yeah.
And that's one of the challenges with it. But then I find on the other spectrum of it, one of the challenges with just going into the martial arts side of it is if you're not careful with what they're teaching there, you can lose a lot of the philosophies and the balance part of it of a traditional martial art. So what I mean by that is like you can go so far into the athleticism and so far into just learning how to fight that you're not learning the respect, you're not learning the honor, you're not learning a lot of the things that people think about of traditional martial arts. You're only, I mean, if you're a bad person, you're just learning it to beat somebody up. And in my opinion, this is a respect sport. This is something that should be handled with care and shouldn't just be like, hey, I want to just learn how to fight. Like there's a lot more things to martial arts than just the fighting aspect. And I was even talking in our first video with that. It all stems from yourself. It stems from who you're changing into as a person, not worrying about who you're fighting out there, but who you're fighting every day inside, and that's you. You know what I mean? And if you're so fixated on just like, I want to learn the new elbow and I want to be able to knock somebody out like this, you're losing the biggest part of martial arts that traditional styles teach.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I even, back in the old days, you didn't have TV. So you went to a Korean temple or a studio, and that was it. It was in your neighborhood, and you didn't see anything outside that. You might have heard of someone or...
Yeah.
But when we're in the age of television, and now it's even better because you're in the age of information.
Right.
So it has opened up doors. Like I got into so many other martial art because of the yellow pages.
Yeah.
And,
Well, how long does it take if you don't have the internet and you don't have other styles? Kind of like one of the benefits of the UFC and MMA coming out is seeing what styles are actually effective. How long would it take for you in a studio to find out that what you're learning is BS? That's one of the challenges. If you only have that one studio there, you don't know how to look anything up, and they're making it seem like all this stuff works in a vacuum, you're stuck there. How long is it going to be until, hopefully this never happens to some of those people, but how long after learning these things are you going to be in a self-defense situation where that might fail you? And you might learn that your traditional martial arts was watered down to the point that in that one moment of your life when you really needed that martial art the most, that's when you find out it's fake. And that's the biggest challenge with what used to go on before.
Yeah, but now you can kind of go in the middle and say, okay, so we have traditional and we have modern, but a punch is a punch, right, in a sense. I mean, there's different angles and things like that, but a kick's a kick. Close range is close range.
Yeah.
So it all goes back to the person training, and the teacher training them. And then we talked about the first one, what should we work on a daily basis, and what should we be training? Like, I've gone too far to the right sometimes, and I had to come back and go back to practicing form, because I've noticed if you're not practicing form, which is one of the benefits of a traditional system, you might get sloppy, or your stances. I mean, there's just so many parts to becoming a complete martial artist, and I think you could benefit from two of them. Again, saying that we have two, systems that are quality, that it went from master to student to master. So yeah.
I actually have a question for you, and I want to see what your opinion is on this, because I've been kind of thinking about this for a while. A big part of forms, I think, is starting to be replaced with weightlifting. I think a lot of the things that you're developing from being able to have that body unity and from working antagonistic muscles, you can develop maybe in some ways more, maybe in some ways less, through a well thought out weight training system. Because you are training the muscles, you are working all that. There's certain stretches, flexibility. What's your opinion on that?
That's a great question, right? I mean, first of all, everybody who's doing martial arts should get some kind of weight training. Right. I mean, you got to build your depending on what your genetics are. I mean, some people might have smaller legs, or so you got to train to become a complete balance. I mean, you know
Human.
that. Right. But form. And I can say, because I've done it so long, it really gets into body unity, that you have to move and flow and open the joints, just like when we even close and open. I mean, if you do too much weight training without the proper maybe yoga or flexibility, but flexibility is important. But I've seen a lot of students or beginner students that are very strong and they're flexible, but they have a hard time doing a form.
Right, can't put it together.
They can't put it together in a sequence. And I mean, look at Alan Wiest. I mean, here he is, started when he's 10 years now, so 60, started when he's 57. He didn't train since the 70s, and he was really stiff.
Yeah.
Right? And he has strong muscles, a strong person. He probably weight trained for a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
But look at how he just softened up,
Right.
and how the form. I mean, he did top dough.
Right, and develop something in a way that maybe just yoga and weightlifting by
I don't
itself
think he would have
couldn't
gotten it.
be. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to the fact that if we're looking at everything through a microscope of what helps with fighting the most, we'll kind of get caught in a vacuum. And I keep using that term, but it ends up being so much more than that. Like, if we're just having a discussion of what's better if you want to be a professional fighter, it's obviously going to be just MMA and just focus on that. But there's going to be a lot of things that come into that might not work.
Well,
Do you disagree?
Well, what I think about, I've just can observe and experience what I've seen you do. I mean, you are doing MMA now, and you're working with Randy, and I mean, you're a professional. I mean, you're strong, you're fast, you're coordinated. But if people know what you went through
Right.
from the beginning, and it is about time, right? I mean, you went through moving with sticky hands. I mean, I used to train with you all the time. We'd be on a cruise ship, and you would try to get in. You've done traditional Taekwondo. I mean, at a high level. I mean,
Wingchun.
Done Wingchun. So and in music even.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a balance with you with, music is developing a discipline too that kind of helps your martial arts, and I think martial arts helped your music. But in all those years you trained, I think your next step was MMA, and it became open for you and for everybody, which
Absolutely.
it wasn't there. I remember in 95 and 94, before I even moved out here, it just started MMA. And I remember seeing Christoph Leninger. He was a judo guy, and he fought Shamrock. And here I am in Chicago, and then I move out here, and then I ended up teaching, renting a space from his studio, and it's like, that's a guy.
Yeah.
And then I had to work with him once, and it was interesting.
Yeah.
But think about from that moment to now,
How much has changed.
how it's evolved, right?
Right.
And that would be considered modern.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, and that kind of goes back to one of the benefits of what's changed with more of a modern approach is getting rid of all, if you think about how much MMA has benefited and changed in a positive way in the past 10, 15, 20 years, that's all because they're just throwing away all the bad sides of it. You know what I mean, all the parts of different styles that aren't effective for fighting. But I guess the challenge, what this conversation boils down to, is during that process of creating a perfect system to develop your martial arts, is there anything that we threw away that we shouldn't have thrown away?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it all depends. It's kind of like, where am I going, right? Like, for me, I haven't thrown any of it away. Like,
Gotcha.
I am, I practice Taichi a lot during the day because for me, it just makes me feel loose and keeps me youthful. So none of that has gone away. In Taekwondo, I haven't gotten rid of anything. I mean,
No, I haven't
a side kick, balance, form.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real. Like Master Choi always said, it's true martial arts. I mean, everything we are teaching, not to be, tooting our own horn, it's really been taught and handed down properly.
Well, I think the conversation ends up boiling down to it's somewhere in the middle, just like everything. It's somewhere in finding a balance of both, because I think you can get way too far on both sides. If you go too far on some of the MMA modern side and go only into the fighting aspect of it, you can get gyms where they're just sparring insanely, and you're just like I was talking about at the beginning, they're just fighters. And you're not getting any of that side of it. And all the good gyms, they're not like that. They're gyms like the lab, like places like where you have that respect for each other. But if you go too far on the other way, and you go too far into like that master and this, you can get a little bit culty. And that's the problem, is you go too far in either way and you're damaging yourself more than you're hurting yourself. And that's why I think that the balance is like right somewhere in the center.
Yeah.
Where you're developing both sides of it. You're not going too far into, how do I want to put this? If you have a coach or you have someone who's not training like we talked about last time, and they're not what you want to be like, but you're only learning from them because of the art, you should change your mentality on that.
Oh, totally.
If you're just like, I love anything, I love Kung Fu, but this guy that I'm learning Kung Fu from isn't the type of person I want to be like, learn from somebody else.
Yeah, see, the thing I always say too is, okay, you could look at my history of what I've trained my whole life. I've been pretty dedicated. Of course, I'm a musician, and you know, I've raised you, and but if you go through the years, you can look at me at this point and just decide, did it work for me? Am I still able to move? Am I faster? Like, I feel much faster, like much more integrated.
Yeah.
And that's something that I always say to a student that might go into like even Krav Maga, which is a great military, Israeli military, but I've had some students go into Krav Maga because they thought they weren't getting enough fighting experience, and the three of them got injured.
Yeah.
You know,
well, that boils down to too far on that side.
and I'm not saying it was because of Krav Maga, but I mean, when you're going into combat a lot, the injury possibility, if it's not like a school where they're safe.
Yeah, and if you go too far on one side too, you can overuse certain aspects of your body, and that boils down to the whole thing where you need that refinement of antagonistic muscles. If you're just thinking of throwing a punch over and over and over again, like I want to get my punch like this and like this, you might be neglecting the backside of your arm. You know what I mean? You might be only building this up and not building this up, and eventually that joint isn't going to like that anymore.
Yeah.
So you can go too far to that side, but if you were to tell someone, they're just, let's say a 10-year-old, and the parents want to get them into martial arts, where would you start them?
Personally, I would say they should get into something like like what you're teaching. You're teaching kind of Taekwondo. You got some mixed martial arts in it, so you've kind of blended a real, especially from the 4 and up to 11. You know, they're doing physical training. I mean, you can tell me more what your theory on that is.
Yeah, just so the audience can know, the way I kind of run my classes is I start it where we all jog, we all get warmed up, and then as a group, we all have the respect side of it. We have our stretching, we bow to each other, we go through some of the elements of what traditional martial arts teaches, like that respect, that courtesy towards each other. You know, I talk to the parents a lot. I'm like, how are they doing with school? All those things that you really equate with a good traditional martial artist. And then after that, I work technique with them. So I take some MMA techniques, I take some traditional techniques, and I spend some time on that. And then for about 20 minutes or so, we're really working on athleticism. And I have different ways of so-called hiding repetition. Where if you just tell a kid, hey, I want you to throw 100 jabs, they're going to stop at jab number 4. But if you hide it in certain ways, and you're like, hey, I want you guys to do it where you're clapping hands, where you're moving in and out, and like, all right, I'm going to move in, clap. Move in, clap. Okay, now I want you guys to catch a baseball or catch a tennis ball. Whap, whap. By the time they've done that and they've had fun with it, you tell them to go throw a jab and everything's aligned because they've done the repetitions. They've done it in different ways. So I'll hide repetition, build athleticism for about 20 minutes, give or take. And then the last 10 is all about conditioning and sparring techniques. So what I try to do is kind of one of the points of our conversation. The real answer, in my opinion, is combining the aspects of traditional and modern that suit you and making sure that you don't leave certain things behind. Find a coach that you respect and you want to be like and who practices what they preach, and make sure that you work every side of it. And if your coach tells you, and you trust them and you believe in them, and your coach tells you to do something, I really believe that you should trust them wholeheartedly with this.
And finishing on that, I think we really need to get the audience, we'd like your comments on it, because
Absolutely.
I have a couple more things to say.
Yeah.
And my last thing to say is, I see where the modern or the traditional, like even Taekwondo, doesn't work with the kids nowadays. Like what you've done really got them started, and then as some of our students have gone into, so it's a blend, man. I think
we got to do a part 2 of this conversation.
Of course, yeah.
I really enjoyed this. If you guys enjoyed, please like and subscribe. We talked a little bit too long today, but we're gonna keep doing this. All right, I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you for listening.
Awesome.